for decades, it was probably the most powerful partnership on the planet. You had the world's most valuable company and the world's factory literally building a global empire together. But now, that empire is starting to crack. We're about to unravel the incredible, really complex story of how this relationship was built, what it really cost, and why it's now being pulled apart at the seams. This one sentence pretty much captures the entire story we're telling today. It's all about total codependence. You know, a relationship so deeply woven together that it's almost impossible to see where one of these giants ends and the other begins. This idea of mutual creation, it's the key to understanding everything that's happening right now. All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the amazing success story, then peel back the curtain to see the hidden costs. We'll get into China's brilliant long-term strategy, and finally, we'll explore the massive global shift that's happening as we speak, this great untangling. Okay, part 1, an unbeatable partnership. This is the official version of the story, the one you've probably heard. It's the tale of how a company that was on the verge of dying and a nation on the brink of an economic explosion got together and basically changed the world. I mean, you have to remember just how desperate Apple was. Back in 1996, the company was in a total death spiral. They were selling off their last US factory just to stay afloat. Outsourcing wasn't some grand strategic vision, it was pure survival. But that one decision, starting with the iMac, then really taking off with the iPod and the iPhone, it lit the fuse on one of the greatest corporate comebacks in history. So why China? For years, everybody just assumed it was all about cheap labor, right? But here's Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, basically saying, nope, that's not it. He argues the real reason is skill, the kind of advanced, specialized skill that you just can't find anywhere else on that kind of scale. He once said in the US, you couldn't fill a room with tooling engineers. In China, you could fill multiple football fields. So the scale of that skill Tim Cook was talking about, get this, 28 million. That's how many workers and engineers Apple trained. They didn't just stumble upon a skilled workforce. In a very real way, they helped build a modern industrial army, with their own engineers living at the factories, working side by side to transfer all that knowledge. And the result of all this? It was nothing short of revolutionary. Suddenly, Apple had a supply chain that could scale up at a speed and a volume the world had just never seen before. They could announce a new iPhone and have hundreds of millions of them ready in a few months, a feat that was basically impossible anywhere else. For Apple, it meant insane profits. For China, it meant becoming the world's tech manufacturer. Okay, but that polished success story has a much darker, much more complicated side. So now let's peel back the layers and look at the hidden human cost. Because behind the slick design and all the corporate promises, the reality for the workers who actually built these things, well, it was far from perfect. On one hand, you had Apple making constant pledges about improving labor conditions. But on the other, you have investigations from groups like China Labor Watch painting a totally different picture. Even recently, they found factories using temporary workers at 5 times the legal limit, paying base wages so low that you had to work massive overtime just to get by, and even illegally putting student interns on night shifts. And it wasn't just the workers feeling the heat. Key suppliers like Foxconn were squeezed relentlessly. Their profit margins just plummeted as they got more and more dependent on Apple. The contracts were absolutely brutal. Like if a device was returned under warranty, the supplier had to eat the cost. So why on earth would they agree to that? Because the real prize wasn't making money off Apple. It was trading short-term profits for long-term knowledge and capability. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. Part 3, China's catfish effect strategy. What if this was never just about building iPhones? What if, from the very beginning, China had a much bigger, much more ambitious plan for Apple? Was Apple a partner? Or maybe, was it a pawn? To get this, you need to understand something called the catfish effect. Sounds weird, but stick with me. The idea comes from fishermen who figured out that if you put one catfish in a tank of sardines, it keeps the sardines constantly moving, so they show up at the market fresh and healthy. In the business world, it means you invite a super strong foreign competitor into your market to force your own local companies to get better, and to get better fast. And this is the exact playbook China used on Apple. Step 1, invite the catfish. That's Apple, with its insanely high standards. Step 2, force your local companies to learn from and compete with the best in the world. Step 3, absorb all that incredible knowledge about advanced manufacturing, basically for free. And the final step,
You use that knowledge to build your own national champions, companies like Huawei and Xiaomi, who could one day beat the catfish at its own game.
For years, Apple probably thought they were running the show. But right around 2013, you could feel the power dynamic shift. Chinese state media launched this coordinated campaign against Apple, hammering them on their warranty policies. The pressure got so intense that Tim Cook had to issue a very rare public apology in Chinese. The message from Beijing couldn't have been clearer. Your success here is a privilege we grant you, and we can take it away anytime. The student had become the master. Which brings us right to the geopolitical chessboard of today. You've got trade wars, geopolitical tension, a global pandemic. All of it has exposed the huge danger of putting all your eggs in one basket. So now, companies and whole countries are scrambling to unwind decades of this deep, deep integration.
So the buzzword you hear everywhere now is de-risking, and it's really important to get what it means. It is not the same as decoupling, which would mean cutting ties completely. That's pretty much impossible. De-risking is way more subtle. It's about looking at your over-reliance on one country, in this case China, and strategically diversifying to make your whole operation more resilient to shocks. And here you can see de-risking in action. I mean, look, China is still the absolute core hub with 158 of Apple's top suppliers. But the ground is shifting. Vietnam has popped up as a huge alternative with 35 key suppliers, and India is being groomed to be the next big frontier for manufacturing. It's a slow process, but it is definitely happening.
The strategy isn't about burning the bridges they built in China. It's more about building new ones to other parts of the world, creating these parallel pathways so that if one gets blocked for some reason, the traffic can still keep flowing. It's an incredibly complex, expensive, and really long process. So, finally, what are the consequences of all this? Let's talk about the new world of manufacturing. Because as this great untangling picks up speed, a whole new global map is being drawn, and there are some very clear winners and losers. And the winners are pretty obvious. Vietnam is a massive beneficiary. They're on track to make a fifth of all iPads and Apple Watches really soon. India has even bigger dreams, with Apple aiming to move a quarter of all iPhone production there. And then closer to the US, Mexico is absolutely booming as a near-shoring spot for American companies that want their supply chains closer to home.
But there's another side to this story. While the West is trying to de-risk from China, Chinese consumers are kind of de-risking from the West. There's this powerful wave of nationalism sweeping the country that's making it way more patriotic and cool to buy from homegrown brands. The days when having a foreign logo was the ultimate status symbol, yeah, those are fading and fast.
And the impact on Apple has been dramatic. Its once commanding market share in China has tumbled, pushing it all the way down to 5th place. And who's taking over? A reborn Huawei, along with other domestic powerhouses that now dominate their own market. It seems like the catfish strategy has truly come full circle. But here is the central paradox in this entire situation. For all of the talk about de-risking, for all the new factories in Vietnam and India, an estimated 90% of Apple's products are still made in China. And even the new supply chains, they often depend on critical components that are shipped from China. So for now, it seems like all roads still lead back to the world's factory. So we'll end with a question that brings this huge geopolitical story right back to you and the device in your pocket. This whole global shuffle is driven by a desire for more security, more resilience. But as you make supply chains more spread out and more complex, the cost of making everything is going to go up. So what's the final trade-off for us? Is this great untangling going to make the tech we rely on every single day more secure? Or is the biggest change we'll notice just going to be the price tag?